All right, good afternoon, everybody. How you doing?
Great.
All right, awesome. So I'm Kitzy. I am here presenting with Tim on MDS. I'm actually going to talk first a little bit about a case study for a client of mine where I designed a solution for using MDS to refresh Macs. So let's take a look at that. So this client had multiple offices globally. The headquarters is in the SF Bay area, and all the IT staff actually works out of HQ in the Bay Area. So there's no IT staff in any of the remote offices. There were 3 in the US, 3 international remote offices as well. And yeah, remote offices have no technical staff, sometimes not even on the product side. It's just sales and marketing people and things like that. So getting hands-on help for refreshing computers was a little difficult. It often fell to the very non-technical office managers who don't really have the time or the desire to learn how to wipe and reinstall Mac OS. So the old way that these things are being done was, as I'm sure you're all aware of this process, you boot to recovery manually, you erase the drive with disk utility, install Mac OS, and then in this case, they'd let DTP handle the rest for setting up the machine. But that kind of came with its own challenges. The big one is manual processes are prone to user error, especially when dealing with a non-technical user doing a technical process and they don't quite understand the implications of doing things different than what the documentation says. For example, the key combinations used to start up to recovery, different combinations get you different things. And that can be kind of confusing for people who don't know that. And with the key combinations, different key combinations get you different versions of the OS depending on the machine. Also, the firmware as well gets you different versions. So if your goal is to always get the latest OS, if the machine doesn't have a certain version of firmware, I'm not sure off the top of my head what it is, but there's a certain version that you need to have in order to do the specific key combination to get the latest Mac OS. So that's not always reliable. And especially in offices in areas with slower internet connections, the internet recovery process can be very slow. So we asked the question, how simple can we make the process? One of the things we want to do is remove as many steps as possible. Ideally, we'd have no steps, but unfortunately, we couldn't quite get there. We also wanted to use existing infrastructure. We didn't want to have to deploy anything new. We didn't have to put any new servers or any new networking equipment in the offices. We wanted to use what was already there. We also wanted to make sure we were always installing the latest IT-approved version of Mac OS. More importantly, consistently installing the same version every time we do the process. So we're not getting different versions here and there depending on, again, the firmware of the machine or the key combination used to start up. We also wanted to make it faster than internet recovery, so we wanted something local. And of course, as always, the less dongles, the better. So the solution we came up with was we used the MDS automaton, and we actually have that attached to a USB Ethernet dongle, so it's an easy one-plug solution where they plug Ethernet into the dongle, plug the USB-C cable of the dongle into the machine, and that's really all they have to do. We would send these automatons pre-configured at HQ out to all of the office managers at the remote sites, so they didn't have to configure them or anything, they were just ready to go. We used existing Mac Mini servers that were used for caching servers in each office to act as the web server for hosting the disk images. And so these are actually what the kind of hybrid dongle thing ended up looking like. This is a Anchor USB-C to USB and Ethernet adapter. It actually has 3 USB ports, but 2 of them are covered up by the automaton there, and that's just gaff taped on. So it's not exactly the most elegant looking solution, but it does work really well. And this was kind of my response. I think Tim, I asked you for a version 2 with an Ethernet port built in, and you said, I don't know if we can do that, and so this is what I ended up doing instead. But this surprisingly works really, really well. So for the infrastructure, like I said, we used the existing caching servers on the Mac Minis we had at each site. And all we did was have to enable Apache to host the disk image over HTTP. And then we scripted a syncing of the disk images between the Mac Minis. So we only had to kind of make the change once, and then automation would take over and filter down to the other offices. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So the disk image is uploaded to the primary server at HQ. From there, there's actually a launch daemon with a watch path looking at that folder. And so when it detects that there's a new thing, it then kicks off an rsync script that uses SSH keys to push that image down to the subsequent machines. So it's all automated, and IT only has to do one thing, which is pretty cool. But then we realized we had a problem. When we put a new disk image in, because we're naming them with the version of Mac OS that is contained in the disk image, that changes the URL. And if you've used MDS before, you know that you have to put in the URL in the configuration. And if you change the URL, you have to reconfigure the automaton. So that became kind of a challenge because we didn't want our non-technical office managers to have to open up the MDS app and reconfigure them because we figured that's going to be very error-prone. And shipping the automatons back to San Francisco every time we had a change in an operating system version was obviously not going to work. So we came up with a clever little workaround. How do we make sure the automaton's always getting the latest URL? And the answer to that is we don't. We use actually an alias in Apache. So Apache has this alias module, and so what we're doing is we're aliasing the /macOS/latest to whatever the current disk image version is, which means that we have to make the change on the server, not on the automatons. The automaton's always looking at server.com/macOS/latest, and then whatever the configuration configuration file in Apache is pointing at is what the automaton will obviously end up pulling across. So we just had to modify that rsync script to then go into this file and change the string to match the file name that it just put down, which ended up being pretty easy. And then that's pretty much how we did it. So the shiny new process is the office manager option boots the Mac. They don't have to remember any specific key combinations, just hold the option key. Couldn't be easier. They plug in the Ethernet connected automaton into the Mac, and that's it. That's all they have to do. They just wait, and it's done. So, I tell them go have a coffee while the robots do the work for you. And eventually, 20, 25 minutes or so, the machine boots up and everything's good. And that's the process that we did. So I'll turn it over to Tim, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how MDS works, and then we'll answer questions at the end.
Ooh. Let me check my microphone. Is this okay? People hear me? Can I move it? Hello? Oh, is that better? Okay. A little bit better. Okay. I have this nice lapel on my my lab coat, so it's nice. So I like to start with a demo. So I'm Tim Perfitt from Tucanu Software. I'm the one that created MDS as a holiday project to give a respite from the family activities. So family activity, coding, family activities, coding is kind of how I do my holidays. And it works out well for everyone. So this, it all kind of started back in, actually at Penn State here. I came to a session about automating dual boot, I think, with the Arduino. It was Rob Roy did a session last year. And I went up to him afterwards. I'm like, this is interesting, you're automating it. And then the T2 Macs were coming out of it at that same time, so I almost sarcastically made an automaton to boot to the recovery and show that you could restore a Mac that way. It's just kind of like this is where we're at right now. We're using, keyboard emulators to do it. And after I did that, I did a blog post. I thought it was kind of funny, and people started using it for real, and which is neat because it's like it filled a niche, right? So that was kind of interesting, and so people started to use it, and then I realized that some folks were actually using it to deploy Macs or using kind of that technique from the recovery partition and external drives to deploy. And I'm like, well, everyone's supposed to be using DEP and MBM. That's what we're told, right? So if you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. But I have this. There's this history of. I read the book. Everybody read the book History of the Internet. It starts off, I think, at MIT with the Railroad Club, right? And they would do optimizations of switches on railroad tracks. And I didn't go to MIT, nor am I that old. But their ideas, part of the part of the kind of culture of trying to, I did that in 10 lines, well, I can do that in 9 lines. I can do it in 8 lines, right? We're trying to make it faster. And I started up imaging Macs where I could get it down. I could do a whole room in like a half an hour, right? I can do a machine in like 5 minutes. And now we're booting through recovery, downloading it, and it takes, 45 minutes to an hour. I'm just like, this needs to be optimized, right? So I took it as a personal challenge to see how fast I could get it. And that was my challenge. I was going to make a nice blog post along those lines over the holidays. I was going to make it to see how fast I can get one of these done. And so that's how MDS kind of got started. And it also helped me to join Slack and not be overwhelmed by it and kind of talk with folks about it. And some people, it was a little bit surprising because I put a build up and people would like, well, I just deployed a bunch of Macs with it. I'm like, what? We're in the middle of the holidays and this is not production, but it is based on the Apple tool. So I wasn't too concerned that it was going to cause problems, but rather it seemed to be filling a niche. And so we wheeled on from there. And it really came about because of these. I have my T2 Mac Mini, right? And I love this Mac Mini, by the way. I used to love Mac Minis, and then they didn't refresh them for a long time. And then the T2 one came out, and it's got 4 USB-C in the back, 2 USB-A, HDMI, and Ethernet, right? I don't have to use a dongle in this ever. Awesome. And the problem with the T2 problems, but the T2s have a T2 processor on it that it does secure boot, right? It makes sure that the bootloader is signed, and then it manages the SSD. So it's very much this kind of supervisor on top of things. And we lost some things. We lost NetBoot. We lost target disk mode in some aspects of it. And Apple really recommends that you use the installer. And so you want to be able, those are the kind of the guidelines. You want to be able to use the installer. So the T2 is driving this, and if you don't have Macs that are T2, you will soon enough, right? Because it's very clear that all the ones are coming out. I used to tell people every new Mac comes out has it, and then the new iMacs came out and they didn't have it, so it ruined my narrative. So unfortunately, Apple ruined my narrative. But we've seen the Mac Pro, and I expect that to have the T2 on it as well. And so we need a way to be able to do labs and being able to deploy new machines quickly, but also integrate them with MDM and MDS, or MDM and DEP. So let me show you a demo, and I got this great setup. This is like my own personal Rube Goldberg setup for demonstrations. So I have this thing called an Elgato HD60S that takes HDMI from the Mac Mini, right? And people use this device if they're doing Twitch for streaming on games from whatever. So like you can capture from your Xbox or whatever to do this, but I do it to capture from a Mac Mini. And so you can see it has this, we can do different consoles, so like, people sitting in their chair and getting YouTube subscribers. So I'm going to start it up. I can't use my keyboard. It shows it in this window, right? So I can show you the boot up process. I have to hold the Option key down, so I have this cool game Gearhead one, has a little trackpad on it, and I broke off keys on purpose so it looks cooler. No, I didn't do it. I did it on purpose. But all I really need to do is hold down the Option key, which is actually called Alt. And everybody listen for the chime. Oh, there's no chime on the new Macs.
Did you plug it in, Tim?
It's not plugged in either. All right. I planned that. Okay. Do I have a light?
No.
No?
There it is.
I do.
There it is.
All right. I do really miss the chime, to be honest with you. Here we go. Okay, that's not my fault. Hold on a second. Restart this over again. That was intentional. It shouldn't do internet recovery, but I'll tell you why if you stop by the booth and get candy cigarettes. I'll do this again. I wasn't joking. We do have candy cigarettes at the booth. All right, now it's booting up. Hold the Option key down. This freaked me out because you get the Apple logo. If you're holding the Option key, you never used to get the Apple logo. You would get the drive, but now because T2 is booting up, it has that Apple on it, which I know. I've been doing this a long time, and when you change the startup process, it's not good. So that's all you need to do. This is what we were talking about before. This is the automaton. It's an Arduino. We'll talk more about it a little bit later, but I just held the Option key down. I got to this screen. You don't normally have to hook up all this gear, right? You just do unpack a Mac. If you have a new T2 Mac, you normally have to put a dongle on this, but it's a Mac Mini, so I don't have to. So I plug this in. Oops, I got a second to do this. And after 5 seconds, it's going to press Command R, and now it's booting to recovery. I put all the resources, I put the Mac OS installer and everything else on this thumb drive. I usually plug them both in at the same time, but it takes exactly 59 seconds to boot up this Mac Mini. That's because I've done it over 1,000 times. And so this is going to boot it to recovery. So this automaton, what it does, there's a little robot in there, and it holds down Command R for you, boots up to recovery, and then it'll dismiss a Bluetooth mouse, it'll choose the language, it'll open up terminal, and it'll run a command for a script that's on this thumb drive or on his web server with a disk image. And then it'll, Imager, how many people have used Imager before? Thought it was dead and I brought it back, or moving it forward, I guess. And then it'll come up with Imager and start, erase the drive and start resetting this Mac out from scratch. So it can't, the automaton has no eyes, so it can't see it, so there's a pause. And it's kind of a long pause because if you have a spinning platter Macs, they take a longer time to start up than this SSD, which this is a really nice SSD kind of thing. It's like the fastest boot up time I've seen on any of the Macs. If you have a 2012 iMac, they boot slower by a little bit. So give me like 30 seconds. What's that? Oh, full screen, sorry, you're right. And if I move the mouse, if I don't touch anything, it'll move the stuff off the sides. There you go. Isn't that nice? All right. So while we're waiting for this, it's only be in a couple more seconds, but I have another free app that I want to tell you about. It allows you. Do you ever have this problem where you're in Messages and you want to send a dad joke to somebody, but you have to go to the internet and find it or use Siri? So I wrote an iMessage plugin that allows you, that contacts a dad jokes API. Yes, there is a dad jokes API on the internet. Oh, okay, so I'll still do the dad jokes, but let's go through this. Actually, I have time let me tell you one dad joke as well. I'll send it to my wife because she always loves a good dad joke. Okay. I was in an 80s band called The Prevention. We were better than The Cure. All right, it's still going. Don't worry, we have time for that one. This is my favorite. Don't trust atoms. They make up everything. Okay, so I'm not touching this, right? There's no ghost in the machine. So what it's doing is it just opened up terminal using keyboard commands. Now it's going to run, hopefully, on the, oh, sorry. So this is not, sorry, it's supposed to be automatic, but you have to connect up to network. And normally you wouldn't have to do this, but since this has an evil captive portal, and yes, all captive portals are evil, I have to manually intervene. If you have a captive portal and you're doing anything with Macs, you would probably have a separate network to do that. So, does captive portal work here? I don't think it does it? Oh, it did. It connected. Oh, but it's not going to work because AT&T. Oh my God. All right, hold on. Let me do some magic. Oh, it's just going to start doing everything. Okay, this is all great. Okay. Let me open up Safari. Oh, I used my keyboard. Oh, I just quit it. Wrong one. All right, let's move along. Let me go right back. So one of the things about the macOS installers, you have to have internet connection for check for firmware updates, right? Everyone knows that. That's the new world we live in. When you boot to Internet Recovery, it'll remember the last network you connected to, so that's almost always connected. But if it isn't, MDS can connect to it. But since this is a captive portal, if connected to it, it can't select the website accept, which is not my fault. So let me just open up Safari and do my captive portal business. If anyone wants to give me their EduRoam password, I'll take that as well. No takers, darn it. How do I get one? I just want one because I don't have it. It's not fair. So example.com is a real URL, and it's never SSL, which I just learned recently, and I thought that's awesome. Example.com. Great. I got to read about Meghan Markle. You guys give me a minute? Sorry. That could be bad for demos, right? It's like, oh, my captive portal just ruined it. Okay. Now, normally if you're on a network that wasn't horrible captive portal, let me make it bigger. It works. And now what the automaton did is it ran /volumes. Oh my gosh, I have too many windows. I'm gonna launch the nuclear weapons. Okay, that's close enough? Okay. There we go. Volumes. Oh my gosh, it's like a French keyboard. No, it's not. I'm not picking on the French, right? Because when I did this, right? I love the French, right? It's my favorite people. But right, no, because Americans love to complain about the French, right? But I love the French. I've only had nice things when I've interacted with people from France and French Canada. But their keyboards aren't just like the keys. Isn't just like the same keys but do different things. They rearrange everything on the keyboard so you can't type, and it makes things harder for software. And time zones are horrible. Can people stop using different time zones? It makes software harder. Okay. Okay. So it checked the network to make sure it's running. The reason it does it, it failed right there, is if it erases the hard drive and then goes to the installer, it takes a couple of minutes, then it fails, you now have a Mac that has no data on it, and you got to go to Internet Recovery. So I fail right away, failing in a good way where it doesn't do it. So it checks the internet, and look, it's running. So just imagine that whole middle part went to the captive portal I didn't do, and this just came up. And it's going to erase the hard drive, it's going to install Microsoft Office, Google Chrome, bind to or enroll to MDM, and all those things. And so we'll let that run. It takes about a half an hour. There we go. I'll close this. And go back to my slides. So I'll let that run. So what is MDS? MDS is an open source project. It's an MIT-style license, which is important because that means you can take it and use it and not have to pay for it, or if you change the code, you don't have to let me know about it or let the project know about it. It's a very liberal license. And there's no per-client license fees because it is open source. I could charge you license fees if I wanted to, but you didn't have to pay them. You can go and compile it yourself. We're not currently doing that, but if I were to become somebody that wanted a profiteer perhaps and started charging you for it, you could always go compile it yourself. We do offer paid support. And this came about, this project kind of, the way I structured it is, another component I didn't tell you about is that we make another product called WinClone that allows you to deploy dual boot. And we were working on some SCCM, you guys do SCCM, anyways, Microsoft integration. And I was visiting customers. This is last, March. And they were complaining about, Deploy Studio isn't working for these new Macs. Our imaging, they're telling us not to do it. What do we do? What do we do? I'm like, I'm here for the dual boot stuff. I don't do that other stuff, right? And they're like, I know, but I can't complain to anybody, so I'm going to complain to you. And I'm like, I can make Windows work great on your Macs, but not so much. I mean, I don't have the source to deploy Studio. Get an MDM, get DEP. And then I heard like 5 reasons why I can't do it. I'm like, okay, he's a whiner. Go to somebody else. And I kept hearing the same story over and over, right? There is specific instances where even if you have MDM or DEP, that you want to be able to have a process do that. And we're going to talk about those. So I looked at, like, okay, people that are using, there's specific reasons people use Deploy Studio. Budget is one of them, but there's other reasons as well. And one of the reasons Deploy Studio, there was complaints about Deploy Studio, not so much in the software, but around you couldn't pay for support from it from the vendor that did it, right? You can buy it from probably third parties, or I know some of them did that, but they didn't have access to the source code because it wasn't open source. So I wanted to solve those problems, right? I'm doing similar things that Deploy Studio does, but I want it to be where it's free if people want to do it, but if they want to give me money and get support, I think that's good too, right? And also, I want to have where the source is available so somebody else can do it. Like, you don't put all your stuff into this open source, in this product, and all of a sudden it's not being updated. You don't have access to the source. Somebody else can't carry it on. And so it's kind of the Deploy Studio model, but it's open, it have access to the support and access to the source. And we also provide hardware. The hardware is based on open source platform at Arduino, so you can actually make your own boards if you wanted to, and you want to waste a lot of money because they're a lot cheaper from them if you just buy it. We also have firmware for those, but we make that open source as well. But if you want modifications to it, I'll tell you there's 3 ways to get modifications to it. One is to ask me to do it, and it's really interesting, and I'll do it right away. Number 2, ask me to do it, I don't think it's that interesting, and I'll put it in a list of stuff that maybe to work on. Or you give me money by buying support, and I'll work on it right away. It's called coin operated. Okay, I just showed you what I did, initial setup and rapid return to service. So that's the idea, is that you have this new Mac and you want to take it out of the box and you want to get it ready and have it know that it's ready and give it out to somebody, or it's not working, it's not connected up to MDM, it has sensitive data on it, you're not sure what data is on it, and you want to just return it. And a great example of that is that we had a lot of people in rental places where they rent computers, where they give it out, they have admin to it, it's not managed by MDM, but when it comes back, there can't be any data on there. Right? They have to wipe it for 2 reasons. One, they're contractually obligated, and 2, they want to give it to a new customer that have data on it that might be strange or inappropriate. So they have to wipe it all. So the idea is that you don't want to care. And we used to do that by just walking up, holding down the N key, right, and wiping it. But now you can walk up and you can plug in a thumb drive or just the Arduino. And then you walk away and let the robots do the work for you. And then you return in about 30 minutes for a fully configured Mac. And we'll show you the settings. You can have it skip the setup assistant as well. You can have it skip the privacy control. So literally it can be, you're at the login window and you just log in. And so you don't have to go through that less clicks. And this goes back to that initial point I said, I want to get it set up as fast as possible. Right? The least number of switches on the railway cars or the least number of lines in code, the same thing. I want to see how fast I can do it. It can't do it down to 3 minutes or 5 minutes for the block level imaging, but it can get as close to the installer time as possible, and that's right around 22 minutes. Anybody know, in WWC they talked about APFS imaging that caused all sorts of fun stuff. I think I'm allowed to say that. But anyway, yeah, it was in the regular videos. But we can add that in as an optimization, but really using the installers is you're going to end up having more and more problems if you don't use the installer. So the streamlining is important. So not all Macs are enrolled in DEP. How many people are enrolled in DEP? All their Mac, every one of their Mac, or almost every one of their Macs is enrolled in DEP. Raise your hand. Okay. Can people raise their hand? The ones that aren't enrolled in DEP? Seriously, oh, it's a select group of people. Right? You wouldn't be in the session if everything was in DEP, I guess. What is that called? When you do a survey, but it's what's that? Yeah, selecting, I couldn't hear it, but anyways, move on. And netboot is dead, right? You hold down the N key and then you cry a little bit because it doesn't work, except for the new iMacs, which again ruins my narrative. But it soon will be dead. And so you can't netboot anymore, so you need another way to do it. And you have to be booted from an OS to install the OS. And one of the obvious things is external booting, right? You plug in a thumb drive and you boot externally. Well, the T2 Macs can boot externally, but you have to boot to the recovery partition and enable external booting, and then reboot into it. And that, as I said, it takes 59 seconds with these, 3 minutes for an iMac, and then you have to reboot it again. That's adding time on that I didn't want to have. Plus, you're making them less secure. It's a security feature. So we wanted to not have to change any settings. So if you can't contact an MDM server, you don't want to have to troubleshoot it. Like you have this lab machine or student machine, doesn't have data on it. You don't care. You just want it to work. You don't want to go in and troubleshoot, like why isn't it contacting MDM? You just want to get it up and running as fast as possible. And it needs to be consistent, right? And this is one of those funny things that, so one of the things you can do with MDS, if you don't use the hardware, you can type that, you saw me type that command with this keyboard really poorly. And if you think, well, my students, or I'm good at typing terminal commands, I set up a lab where there was 5 technical people, and they all had to type in this command, and I think we got it wrong 3 times out of like 30 machines. And they just typed it again, right? But that shows you even highly technical people. If I type something 30 times and did it, I'm going to get it wrong a couple times. Guess how many times the automaton gets it wrong? 0, right? It just types the same thing over and over. And I'd rather not hide and pack these little things. I just plug it in. So even if you're not doing it, it's way more consistent. And so it prepares a Mac in seconds. When I say in seconds, it doesn't mean the Mac's done. It means I unbox it, I put it on the table, like what we were just talking about. We plug it in Ethernet cable, and you plug in the automaton, and then you move on to the next one. Right? So you're only touching that Mac for just a couple of seconds. And so you just move on to the next one. It does use the standard OS installer. So it uses the start OS install command. So that's in every Mac OS installer going back to 10.12, 10.13. No, it's only really 10.13.4 was really when it became effective to use it. And we're at 10.14 going to 10.15, so that's like ancient history now. And keep resources local. And I think we talked a really good, Kitzy talked a lot about, or a good point was made about being able to keep it in those remote offices is a lot faster. So if you don't have lightning speed internet everywhere, you can keep it local. It turns out that if you use a $10 thumb drive or a $500 SSD drive to do it, you save about 2 minutes. Because it copies all the resources to the internal hard drive, and read times on crappy thumb drives is not that much worse. And so I thought, like everyone should get really fast SSDs and use those, and that helps when you're copying it to the drive. But when you're deploying it, it doesn't really make that much difference. So go to Amazon, buy a $10 thumb drive, and it'll work fine. And it can be fully automated or partially automated. The fully automated is what I showed you, if you ignore that middle part where you have the evil captive portal. Or partially automated, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because if you use Imager, and we do this as well, you can prompt it for the computer name, you can prompt it for other things, and we'll talk about how to configure that. So the tech walks up to it, they plug in the automaton, it gets all to up to the part it's going to start, and it prompts them for information the computer can't figure out. Asset tag, building number. Somebody wanted their subnet and route to type in there because that's cool. So how many people computer naming is important in their lives? Yeah, okay. How many people the computer can't figure out the computer name and you have to type it in? Yeah, okay. So I didn't know this was an important thing, and I left it out on the first feature, and I was told very quickly that feature needed to be added, which is good. So these are the 2 scenarios. First one, ooh, my pocket protector has a laser pointer. I want to get to use that. Oh yeah, look at that, people. I don't really need it, but I'm going to use it anyways. So you can have it on an external drive, or you can do it on a disk image. MDS will automatically save those resources. And then you boot to the recovery partition. You can boot from this drive as well, right? So if you have an older, the reason we say do this is that if you have an older machine, and you know that if you hold down, if you go into recovery, actually, if you use Deploy Studio, you've chosen not to have the recovery partition. You delete that. So you go to Internet Recovery. And you notice that all of the stoplight icons on the left side, they're this nice globe-like looking thing, which means you're in the Lion recovery partition. And that's 10.7, and pretty much everything will fail if you do that, right? Marriages, your car will break down. It doesn't work. So in those situations, making an external drive is a good situation. So for older machines or you don't have recovery. I just shined a laser point in my eye. Oh, that was a flashlight. Let's run this one. So then it runs it either from these resources. It does make, obviously if you do it over the network and you have a lot of network resources, it takes longer. It doesn't take, I thought it was going to be, I focused very much on the thumb drives and the external drives at first because I thought that the time difference would be huge. It's not. It's you'll add 5 or 10 minutes onto it if the total amount, if you have like 10 or 20 machines on a good like gigabit Ethernet thing. If you're over Wi-Fi and it's crappy, it's going to not be a very good experience, but it will work-ish. Most of them will work. So it's back to the days where when you net boot, you got to have a kind of a solid network. It's pulling those resources down if you want to do it off a web server. So if you double-click on the DMG or you double-click on the thumb drive, you'll see these resources. So it has things you can see like Imager is on there, network setup to join the Wi-Fi, and these are packages, and the Mac OS installer is in there as well. Okay, it's actually, this has changed. It no longer requires to be a DMG. We can just use the .app that's used, that you download from the App Store. And that's one of the big advantages to MDS is that the OS installer requires packages that are well-formed and are distribution-type meta packages, which doesn't really mean anything to me. I look it up and then I immediately forget it because it's really kind of esoteric and hard to remember. So what it does, it looks at your packages you put in there and it says, oh, if it's the wrong kind of package, it won't repackage it. It'll package your package. Right? Yes, really. That sounds like a bad thing to do. So what I do is I package up your package as a payload, install it into temp, and then when the machine boots up, I run the installer command on it. And then, so that means that it's done, and that solves all sorts of problems because it installs it the way the vendor kind of expected it to be installed. And if it's a distribution type package, it'll just install it straight and it'll be fine. This is less and less now, but before people would be like, I tried this package, it didn't work. They'd send it to me, I'd pull it apart and see what the problems were. It almost always was it was expecting something in user space, like a user was logged in, which are just plain evil packages. So the next version of MDS, we're going to have it where you can actually log in and install something. Those packages are usually, I'd say, we got to fix that. But if it's just something it's expecting network being up, we have a checkbox that says, make sure network resources are available. But anyway, so these are the packages installed. And so you now have a disk image on a web server, or you have a thumb drive that has it. And now we have the automaton. And if you came to the, let me look and see how this one's going. Oh, there it is. So this is a funny thing. It turns yellow. Has anybody seen this before? I thought it was my monitor, but it's other monitors, it turns yellow. It's really weird. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay. So now it's done. Installing the OS. It's doing this. I can unplug the thumb drive. This feels really bad to do. Like it's installing, unplugging the thumb drive, but it copies all the resources to it, so it doesn't hurt it at all. And I can unplug the automaton, and then I go to my next computer and next computer and just keep going on. Right. At the first reboot, I can do that, and I said it takes about 2 or 3 minutes to do that initial stuff. So this is the automaton. I wish I used to have a little camera that I could do. Wait, I can do that. Ha, 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 ha. Hold on a second. Photo booth. Can you see me? You can see me. Hello. Oh, I can look right there. Okay. Wow, that's a nice looking jacket. Whew. All right, so the automaton looks like this. It has a USB cable on it, and inside of this, it has, you can see a little micro USB. You can't really, trust me, there's a micro USB connector. And then, man, this is really tight. Who designed this? This is a great design. Oh man, I can barely get it open. There we go. And so inside it has what's called Adafruit Itsy Bitsy 5 volt. You can immediately forget that, right? Because if you get them from us, We'll just take this and we'll flash the correct firmware on there, and you can just go and set it up. If you fashion yourself a maker, you can go off and buy the same one and use our firmware to put on it. If you fashion yourself a hardcore maker, you can design the board yourself or buy a different kind of Arduino if you want to. Not all Arduinos work because we emulate a keyboard. It has to have the correct, it has to have the USB stack on there. So that joining Slack, you can ask all sorts of questions. I love answering those questions because I'm kind of a hardware geek, but I'll probably wear you out. You'll just say, I'm going to go buy the $10 one on Amazon. It's a lot easier. But isn't it kind of neat? It's cute, isn't it? And we have this nice little enclosure. So when I was originally doing it, I had on this USB cable. It was just a raw circuit board, right, like this. And most likely it won't short out or kill anyone. I'm pretty sure it won't kill anyone. But when it's hanging out, it's like falling into things. It made me nervous, right? So that's why we did the enclosure. And it turns out there's a lot of enclosures for this kind of stuff, but they're all like ones that you can plug wires in and stuff. Nothing that looks kind of like a thumb drive. So that's what we did with this. So this Arduino will, when you plug it in, you have 5 seconds to configure it, and you can just basically, if you open up, wow, that looks weird. I'll close that down right now. All right, so this one's done. So we mark the time. Let's just say it was really fast. But it was. I mean, that wasn't that much time, right? This is completely set up from scratch. It actually didn't have anything on it before, but just trust me, it was set up from scratch. So what this does is, you can open up the sheet to configure it and plug it in, and that'll work. If you don't do that, you just plug it in. It waits 5 seconds to see if there's an admin connection. Then it presses Command R for you, right? And what happened before I went to Internet Recovery, I held down Option to go into the selector, and this was pressing Command R. And if you take that recipe, which is Option Command R, what do you get? Internet Recovery, right? Option Command R is Internet Recovery. So the Mac was doing what it was supposed to. I was just wrong. So it does Command R. It weighs 120 seconds, and that's enough time for the language selector or the recovery to come up. Opens up terminal using the magic of the keyboard shortcuts. If you do Control function F2, it'll go to the Apple menu, and you can navigate. And that's all it does. It goes in and it does that, opens it up, runs Imager, and from that point it goes on. You don't need this. You can very well open up terminal with your pointing device and type those commands. That works too. I'm lazy. If I plug this in and let the robots work for us until they take over, then we work for them. But for now, let's get what we can. So you power on with the Option key. So one of the requests, and this is the way I started out, is like, why not just plug it in and power it on? Right? That would be better. Well, it turns out the automaton needs power, and the USB port doesn't give power until you turn it on. Right? So that timing is really variable. Different Macs turn on the USB ports at different times, but if you hold the Option key down and get to the selector, you get those key combinations still work, and it's always the same start point. So it's very consistent that way. And I spent a good week trying to get it to work by just plugging it in, and realized if I add 2 seconds on for holding the Option key, everything will be very consistent. And I've had people challenge me on that and do it, and they come back and they're like, yeah, we're going to do it with the Option key because it's not worth not fighting against it. And especially with dongles, right? Different dongles will power at different times too. It's just like there's certain hills to die on. Dongles is not the hill I'm dying on. So they plug in the automaton and external volume, and then you move on to the next Mac. And people ask you, how many automatons do you buy? And I say, how much is your budget? Because I want all your money. No, I'm not. Usually, depending on the speed of the Mac, you plug it in, you move on to the next one. By the time you get to about the 5th one, the first one's done. Right? You can do it with 3, and then you might have to wait a little bit. You can get 30 for every one of your rooms. In fact, I recommend 30 because I get more money. Right? But I would say order 3 to 5 if you wanted to do this, or do your own, and just see how it works as people go through it. There's a lot of external dependencies. Like if you're unboxing a Mac, that's going to take a lot longer than doing this, right, than plugging it in. So if it takes you 5 minutes to unbox, I don't know. People have done this before. How long does it take to unbox a Mac? Does anybody know? Depending on the Mac. On iMac. What's that? Oh, I just want people to be happy. Money corrupts, right? You don't need money. Yeah, you do that. So I sell support, right? You'll pay for support and not necessarily the hardware. Okay, so then you move on to the next Mac, get to the 5th one, and they can roll over or keep rolling through the lab. And what we found with the timing is that on average about 2 minutes per Mac. So one of these things is like, how many of these do I need to buy? How many texts do I need to put on this? So the ones these are the numbers we kind of ran. We did a bunch of testing in a lab. There's less than 2 minutes per Mac initial setup, and you have to return after 5 minutes. That's that first reboot. Sometimes it's slower. It won't generally be more than 5 minutes. And then the rolling configuration, one tech can be setting up 5 Macs at one time. So by the time the 5th one's done, they can grab this one and go on to the 6th one. And that first one's done, and now it's like a rolling window frame. I had to put in a whiteboard, like it was a math problem, right? Because it's overlaps, and it's wasn't a trivial problem for me. So this is what MDS looks like. It's a Mac OS application. It was accepted into the App Store. It was, if people follow me on Twitter, I had like a 2-month bare knuckle battle with the App Store. It wasn't really that dramatic. They just took it and they had no idea what they were like, whoa, I'm staying away from that thing. So I submitted it and it just went dark. It went dark for weeks. And then I escalated up and they're like, we're looking at it. And then it was going to go to the review board, which pretty much means you're dead. And they're going to meet on Friday. And then Friday came and went. And the next Friday came and went. And I sent them and they're like, well, the review board didn't meet. And in my mind, I'm visualizing it's just Phil Schiller sitting at a desk. So I guess Phil was on vacation or something like that. And then I was already like all the reasons, because it's really dodgy, right? In terms of like the perspective, because you're booting from the recovery partition and you're installing the OS. You're using a hardware product that's emulating a keyboard, which seems a little bit, I don't know. It's not a keyboard, it's a device. It's not a key logger, but it's a distant cousin to a key logger. And so, and I put out a poll. I posed like, how many people, what are the reasons it will be rejected? Right? I didn't even assume it was going to be accepted, right? The 4 reasons, right? All the different things. And people were just like booting the recovery partition, that's a no-go. It got accepted. It was in the App Store, and I'm like, I didn't know what to do. I'm like, because I was on version 1.5, and what got accepted was 1.1, right? So I didn't know what to do with that. So I haven't put it back on the App Store, and we've added a lot of features, and I haven't had anybody ask me for it yet. I was just proud of myself for doing that and going through it, and it allowed me to rant on Twitter, because isn't that the best part of life, is ranting on social media? So it could go in there. I don't run anything as root. That was the big thing. Even the web servers, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is what it looks like. You can have multiple workflows. The workflows are selected when you go into recovery. It can select one for you automatically, or you can select them. They do not run in order. You run one workflow and that's it. You choose a workflow, you run it, you're done. There's multiple workflows in case you have different machines, different rooms. So it's not like it runs the first one, runs the second one, runs the third one. No, this is per machine, it's one workflow. And you can, inside the workflow, you can have lots of different options, but don't think of it as being this list of things to do. So it does kind of look like a to-do list, right? People are like, why doesn't the second one run? Because it's not built that way. You can import and export workflows, which is interesting for folks that, like, if they want to leave it with a customer or whatever. We also prompt you to remove the passwords. So if you want to leave it with somebody or do source control on it, you can do that. So many things like the Wi-Fi passwords, the user passwords, it'll remove them. When you import them, it'll warn you that the passwords aren't there. If you feel fine exporting them, it'll export them into the export file, and then you just import them again. And you can, of course, add and edit those. We have 2 places for Wi-Fi. One of them, so Wi-Fi is needed in 2 places. The first one is, remember when I booted to recovery and I had to have Wi-Fi on so the installer worked? That's this one. That could have joined it. If you don't have an evil captive portal. If you have an evil captive portal, get a different network, because captive portals just cause problems with deployment. You can get around it, but it's a lot of manual intervention. The other one is once the Mac's finished imaging and you deploy it, that could be a different wireless network. So it is a different wireless network configuration. So this is the one for the recovery partition. If you do Ethernet, it just works, right? You plug it in, it figures it out. You don't need to worry about any of this stuff. And that's kind of the best way. That's what you guys did, right? Because it takes an unknown out of it, which isn't our fault, by the way. It's the network's fault. So, but you don't want to have to troubleshoot, especially remotely. You can automatically run a workflow, and so this is the ones for initial setup. It gives you 30 seconds to count down, so you can cancel it and choose a different workflow if you want. We also have only select target volume if named. And this is a great one I added in because people did their labs, and it'll do the first Mac partition in the list, which almost always, it is always the internal drive. But somebody partitioned the drive to data and then Mac, right? And they're like, MDS is great, but it just erases all of our data on our data drives. And I'm like, okay, am I going to get sued now? And they're like, no, it's a lab. It's where the students put their data. It's empty. It doesn't matter, but it's not doing it right. So now we added this, so look for the name of the drive and do it on that one. The other thing is, if you notice remember we had the yellow apple, there's no real good logging on that. So what we do is we have remote logging, and this actually leverages Imager Server. So if you have Imager Server, we built it into MDS. So if you don't have Imager Server, you just click on the upper right-hand corner where it says Show Log, and all the clients will report into it. So it's kind of neat. If you have a whole lab, you put the automaton in, you'll see it start populating the log with stuff that it's doing. And then at the end, you'll see that it's finished, and you'll look in your MDM, and it'll be done. Or you look at the machine, and it's at the login window. We also, this is a funny one because I assumed everyone had a web server they can just put stuff on. And then I got requests for like, we don't have a web server. I'm like, do you have Mac OS X server? And I'm like, yeah. I said, just turn on web services. And they're like, it doesn't have web services anymore. I'm like, of course it does. They wouldn't take on web services. So I spun up my OS X server. By spinning up, I double-clicked on it. There's no web services in there. And you have to go into Apache and do alias files. And I'm like, that's not acceptable. So I put a checkbox in. This just turns on a simple web server that allows you to share your disk images from here. So I haven't done a lot of performance testing on this. I think it actually probably will be all right? Because it opens it up and copies the resources right away, and you're moving serially through things. It's not like everything does it at once and it's net booted off of it. I actually think this will be fine, but this is more for, I want to try this product out. I want to do these couple of machines right now. If you do 100 machines at once, let me know. I'll be very proud of myself. If it fails, not my fault. I told you not to. Buttons down here. One of them is to save to a disk image. The other one's to save to volume. If you click on Save to Volume, you put your thumb drive in and save it. If it's not HFS Plus, it'll yell at you and say, do you really want to do this? Because booting external or having the resources on something that's not HFS Plus is asking for trouble. And then Save to Disk Image just creates a disk image, which you then copy to your web server. I would not name your disk image with spaces because it changes into %20s, and %20s are very confusing for people like me. So take all the spaces out. And make it really short because it's URL and you'll have to type it into the automaton. This is what the interface looks like for the workflow. So you click on a workflow and you have the idea to provide a description, and this will just tell. And this is all from Imager. If you're familiar with Imager, it'll tell you what the workflow is, and this can be rich text, I believe, so you can put fancy bullets in bold and italic and emojis maybe. No, sorry, it's Python 2. Do not do emojis. Unicode sucks in Python 2. It's great in Python 3. The macOS installer, you can select, this is actually a bunch of checkboxes that give it a bunch of different options. So this one is set up, it's going to erase the hard drive, rename it to Macintosh hard drive, and then use the install macOS Mojave app that I downloaded from the App Store. So if I unselect install macOS, it'll use the OS that's on the machine. So if you get a bunch of new Mac Mini or MacBook Airs, they already have 10.14.5 on it. You want to reinstall the OS, you just want to install packages. MDS is going to be really fast, right? It's just going to install the packages and it's going to be done. If you leave install macOS selected and take off erase and install, it won't erase it, but it'll use the installer to bring up to that it'll do a software update on it. And that's really frickin' slow. So I wouldn't recommend that. But you can do it, it works. Now we get to resources. So it's not just packages. The installer requires packages, but we'll repackage everything for you. So you can wait for the network resources, like if you have MDM, where if you try, or binding to Active Directory that requires a network resource, or using Homebrew that requires network, you want to select that. Then you can put any packages. If you just throw an app in there, it'll install it into the applications folder. If you throw a script in there, it can be any language. Except Python 2. No, I'm just kidding. It could be Python 2. And these little arrows, do I show that? Yes, if you do the little arrows, you can say when it's going to be installed, after the packages or before the packages. So for the packages, you can say you can do it after Mac OS installation or before. Oh, I don't show the other. I'll show that in the demo. But you can do the scripts. You can say when they get installed as well. And so this is what my packages folder will look like. It's not just packages. I threw Google Chrome in there. It'll repackage it. Inside that disk image is WinClone, and inside the WinClone disk image is an installer. So it'll mount it, and it'll grab the installer out of it. And if that package is wrong, it'll repackage it for you or embed it in. And then I've got my Mosel installer. How many people use Mosel? I'm usually the only one. They give me a free account, so I use. Actually, I did something where I use Mosel because the Mosel guys were there, and I leave this in all my demos. I look in my console, and I have like 50 or 60 machines enrolled from all the demo machines that I've done. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this botnet now. Yes, question. Yes, we have done Adobe packages. Yes. Yes, no, it does. It does. It does. So I've gotten people to send me the packages. I install them, and it works fine for me. But it does always seem to be a sticking point for them. And so there's usually a little bit of tweaking. That's one of the reasons that I want to go to this first login install, because that I think will make it just like you're double-clicking on the package with the user logged in. So I think that'll remove the mess. But generally, it does work. But you have so many options when you do, what is it called, the Adobe Cloud Installer Manager thing. You go in, I think it's dependent on the options that you do. So it's been spotty, but generally it works. Has anybody done that? I should turn that around. Anybody used Adobe installers with MDS? Raise your hand if it worked. Did it work? Okay, there you go. Proved. One person. What version of Adobe? 2019? What's that? 2019, okay. All right. I don't know what that means, but thank you. That's great. And you create user accounts. So this one's a great one too. I started off with this, and this is actually showing to create the user account. So you put in your normal stuff: full name, short name, password. I put in SSH key because I thought that was cool. I don't think anyone is anybody using SSH key? Sweet. Okay, 2 people in the world are using SSH key. I didn't have password hint. This is one like the, what's the other one I said? Oh, computer naming, where I didn't put it in because I thought nobody used it. How many people use password hint? Right, do you use it to like tell where the passwords are located? No, I mean, I'm not joking. Like what password managers use it, like look in 1Pass. Yeah, it's not like your cat's name. Yeah, if you put the actual password in there, yes. What's that? Yes, because it'll be the first admin, and secure token will work. Anyone you create after that will be fine as well. It's one of those situations where when I first got that question, I'm like, oh my God, this whole thing's not going to work. And then it turns out because it's the first admin and it installs like it normally should install, it works fine. So I've used it with FileVault and all sorts of other stuff. And you can hide the user and automatically log in if you want to do that. The options, you can join the Wi-Fi. Again, this is a different Wi-Fi. This is the Wi-Fi after the user's log, or the machine's been deployed. The computer name, we actually changed this a bit. It now uses variable substitution and fancy things. You can set the setup assistant. This one was great because if you skip the setup assistant, it will skip where you choose the location, which then means everyone will be located in Cupertino, and your time zone will be Cupertino, which is not where everyone lives. I don't even live there. So I changed it so you can skip everything but enable location services, which means it'll find that. And if it doesn't find that, just reboot your machine and then it'll find it. For some reason, some networks don't find it the first time. I don't think it's my fault. I think it's just the way when it enables it, it doesn't find it. And SSH and administrators to screen share. This is a great one because somebody said you can't do that because you have to be bound to MDM to be able to do it, but that's only for remote administration. What is that called with ARD? Remote management, which is, okay, whatever. This is screen sharing. So if you do VNC connections, that does work, which is kind of cool. So if you turn that on, you can go to it. Yes, question?
On the Wi-Fi, does that work on enterprise networks like the 8
So no, it doesn't. This is just a straight username password for WPA or WP2. If you want to do 8021X or something like that, you put a profile and drop it in the profiles, and it would install that and have it work. It's a very simple one if you want to just kind of have a simple username and password network. And these variable ones, this one I was proud of. Oh no, let me tell you a story about the user account. So the user account, it had one user account because I'm like, all admins have one service account because that's the way the world works, because I have a lab coat on and I know how the world works. And then some people in Slack, they're like, we need a second one. Like, you don't need a second one, just use the first one. They're like, well, IT is different than the help desk. And then another person said it, and another person said, okay, that makes sense, I'll add it in. Within 24 hours of adding the second one, guess what happened? I wanted a third one. I said, people, we need to settle down here. So I made it so you can put as many as you wanted in, right? So you can just add as many accounts as you want, and then I ask people, and I'm up to 9, right? One customer, they have students come in for like a camp, and they do student 1 through 15 or student 1 through 9. And so anybody use more than 9 accounts when they first set up their Macs? Nobody? All right, 9's still the record. All right, so then the last one is set variables. So you're prompted, like an Imager, it is Imager, you're prompted for the computer name. And then people came back and they're like, well, I want to be prompted for subnet, or I want to be prompted for route, right? And I'm not going to put in a bunch of checkboxes that say, like, every time somebody wants to be prompted for something, we'll add it in. Right? Mother's maiden name, right? No, I'm not going to add that in. So what this does is you put in the question. Under MDS variable one description, you say, what building are you in? And it'll prompt the user for that. Whatever they type will be passed to your script as MDS variable 1. So you can have up to 9 custom questions you can pull the person setting it up, and then use your own scripts to set those values. And then that made people be quiet, which was nice. Okay, so let me jump in. I'm running short on time, so let me jump in and actually show you some of this stuff. Oh, so let me actually go back and show you that it worked. Probably went to sleep. Whew, it did work. I mean, yeah, it works every time, 100%. Well, it's a demo, right? Things don't work just because I did something wrong to somebody a long time ago. Oh my God, this keyboard's horrible. Okay, so it logged in. So what didn't you see? You did not see Setup Assistant. What else you didn't see? Privacy controls, right? It didn't ask, do you want to set up Touch ID and do all those really fancy things for why you spent $2,000 for a computer. It does prompt you for a keyboard, and that's because I left the automaton plugged in after it was done imaging. If I had removed it, it wouldn't do that. So we'll just ignore that this exists. My keyboard, my little keyboard's not working. Oh, yeah, there it goes. Oh, did I just unplug? I just unplugged it as my example. Okay, never mind. All right. So other things. I did a profile that puts the dock on the left. So the dock's now on the left, and we should see if Microsoft Office installed. I'll type M. Mail's installed. Okay, Microsoft Excel, OneNote, Outlook, and PowerPoint. Boom, it's installed. That got installed with Microsoft Installer, which I downloaded from the website. I didn't do anything special with it. I think Google Chrome should be on here, G. Or, oh, see, Chrome. Maybe I didn't put it on this one. We'll say that I didn't put it on this one. And then if you go, the profiles are in here. And you can see that, I did the desktop picture and a root certificate for my JSS, I guess. So I didn't actually do MDM on this one, but I could install the root certificate for that. And you can see this nice backtop. I created that. That was me. So this thing's all set up. And so this is could be deployed, and it could be bound to MDM and off to the races. And so I spent a few minutes before I did this. While I was talking, the robots were working, or actually a single robot was working and set it up for me. Big round of applause for the robot. Thank you, robots. All right, and so let me give you a couple actual tour how to create one of these workflows. These I create ahead of time. So the summer 2019, let me plug in my automaton. I think I'm out of dongles. Oh, I took it apart too. And I put it in backwards. That's great. It'll type all the keys backwards if you do that, if you insert backwards. Okay, I don't have a dongle to plug it in because that's not my fault. That's Apple's fault. Okay. So normally you do the automaton, so you have options to create a Mac automaton. You do this. It just prompts you plug it in, it creates it for you. So if you go off to Adafruit and you buy your own, you plug it in and it'll work. If we have a firmware update, which we do pretty regularly, it'll say to come here. If you go to configure it and there's a firmware update, it'll say don't do that, go and flash a new one. And you just plug it in and it'll flash it. Can anybody throw me up here a USB something? Nothing?
I thought I had one, but it's in my room.
We have a room full of Mac geeks. USB, I just need to plug it, USB-A into my MacBook Pro something or other. Okay, thank you. All right. So I have this, I'm going to start from the beginning. So here, automaton, create Mac automaton. And I plug it in. It'll then, I got to click on create. And it searches for it, finds it, and then it flashes it. That's it. So now this Arduino was transformed into an automaton. Now if we go up here, we can configure the automaton. Oops. It started running. So that's at 5 seconds. You got to plug it in the first 5 seconds. Otherwise, you'll start pressing Command R, which makes your computer beep. Oh, I'm sorry about my desktop. I'm not going to mess around with that. Is there anything embarrassing up there? Radar.txt, that's a good one. Let's look at that one. What that one is. Catalina, okay, doesn't exist. Okay. So this is where you can tweak those settings, right? So if you didn't want to wait a long time because you have a new Mac one, or you want to give more time for an older Mac, you can give the amount of time before it opens up terminal. So that's kind of the time before it goes. What command that you run to run the script, that's that one I typed, and it typed automatically for me. If you have a different name for your drive, you would change, my volume's name is MDS. If you changed it to cool external thumb drive, you would put that there. The delay before running a command to terminal, 6 seconds. That's what I found is that when it goes up to the menu, it says open terminal. On SSD machines, it immediately opens up. On spinning platter drives, it pauses for like a couple of seconds. So I added a delay in there. How many people use firmware passwords? How many people use firmware passwords that's the same password for all their Macs? Yep, most people. So it's like the students don't know them, right? It'll type that in for you if you put it in here, and then it'll go to the option select menu, and then it'll go from there. What's your password? You passed. Nice one. This one, boot into recovery and run workflow when automaton is plugged in. That's what it did. I plugged it in, it waited 5 seconds, then it did Command R. You can turn that off. Why would you want to do that, Tim? That's crazy. There's no reason to have it then, right? Because it wouldn't do the automaton thing. We can leave these plugged in, and it'll listen on the serial port. So it's a robot that's just kind of hanging out, waiting for your command. And you can use the Mac for a couple of weeks, and then using ARD or something, you can send a command on the command line to say, tell the robot, it's just an echo command to the serial port, to go into recovery mode. Then you reboot the machine, and it'll automatically go into recovery mode and automate things from there. So if you leave it plugged in, it can give back that functionality you had where you could send to boot from the NetBoot server, and it would be completely automated. Which I understand, you're in a lab, students are going to steal them, why would you leave them hooked on? Epoxy works really well, and that's awesome. More realistically, if you have like a continuous integration server where you want to plug them in, it's at a remote, we actually have a couple of customers doing this, in a remote location, you have 300, 500 Mac minis or whatever, and you want to reboot them and have them reset themselves up, they leave them plugged in, and then you just give the command to reboot. It works really well. And it's crazy, I know that. Yes?
Set this up as an extra partition on the drive and make it invisible to the students?
Can you set up as an external drive and make it available to the students? Oh, invisible to the students. So then you would boot to recovery. You could boot to that partition and just reset it up. Yeah, you could do it that way as well. It should work. I haven't tried that. I wouldn't erase the whole disk then, because then it would erase your higher partition. Yeah, you would want to just do the one. Open disk utility and erase first volume. We added this in because the new maybe in a future OS, you have to, in order to erase the drive, you have to go into disk utility and delete the volume, and so the automaton can do that. So it does when it gets to recovery partition, it doesn't open up terminal. It opens up disk utility, deletes your partition, and then goes to terminal and runs it. I would not run this on your primary machine that hasn't been backed up in 2 months, because it will erase everything. But that helps with file vaulted volumes. All right, so that's the automaton, how you set it up. You don't have to use the automaton. You can just type the command, right? But this is the stuff that you can use to do that. These I already kind of went through the settings. There's a lot of other features that I wanted to show, but I'm running out of time. I want a little bit of time for questions. There is syncing to, I'll actually jump to that briefly. No. Just give some highlights of stuff. You can create an external bootable volume. So this is the command line tool you use to run an installer that does create, install media. This kind of walks you through it. It does work great with DEP and MDM. So if you don't have it, skip the setup assistant. It'll just have those couple of windows where it says allow remote management. So you do have to click those two things, but then you get the DEP and the MDM enrollment for free. And then the last thing I want to point out is that this is a request that if you have these thumb drives, you have people in remote locations, you can save it to a disk image that has all your resources, and then all the remote people will synchronize against it and get all your workflows. And all the workflows are read-only, so if they want to modify them, they make copies of them and then make them and save them off to the thumb drive. And so this allows for large organizations with places that go and have locations that are out in the middle of nowhere or not the most fun. And the last thing is the save image to a web server. So this, you can see in MDS that I have serve images over HTTP from folder and user shared web. And it has this IP address. And if I click on it, it'll open up a browser. And it's the most boring web page ever. But this is the actual URL to that disk image. Right? If I copy this disk image, you can see that it's here. And that one is being hosted by MDS. You can boot in recovery and mount that disk image and then do all the resources from it. Right? So it runs the command directly off of that. So you just set up your one machine with MDS. And we have 2 minutes for a question, so let's get, anybody have any questions? Hold on one second. We got the cube.
Is it on? Can you hear me?
Hold it closer.
Okay. If you're installing packages that need to be approved in the system preferences, can your automaton do that?
Are you user approved MDM kind of stuff you're talking about, or?
No, like if you install Semantic.
Okay. Oh, that's the kernel extension.
You have the kernel extensions, right?
Can you use the automaton to select that button? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
We've tried that. It doesn't work all that great.
Okay.
Apple's actively working against us to do that, or against people to automate that. And so we recommend just using DEP to do that, or clicking on it yourself. You can automate it. Talk to me. If you buy support, I'll work all day with you on it. But it's not really worth it in the long run.
Okay. Thank you.
Up here? Nice.
When you do your packages, can you set your packages in a specific order?
Oh, can you do the specific order? Yes. Well, no. Yes and no. Okay.
Or is it just alphabetical?
Is it what?
If you start your packages 01, 02, 03.
Yeah, right. So the packages you can do before when running the workflow. That's great for creating like a WinClone one, or after the OS installation. So you can't do it granularly, but if you name them, it will do them alphabetically. So and then you can do 01, 02, and that works great. The scripts have after macOS installed, but before packages, or after Mac and packages are installed. So basically, you can do it before packages or after, and then you can do the packages in between. We have a booth here at Two Canoes. I love talking about MDS. We have a Slack channel that's very active, so please join. It's Two Canoes-MDS. Please join that and post your questions. And thank you for coming. I appreciate it.